Former FBI agent Lisa Page returned to Capitol Hill. She has appeared to 2 House committees behind closed doors to deliver further testimony about her behavior at the FBI over the last couple of years when she and Peter Strzok routinely sent highly political messages to one another, in one case promising to derail the Trump campaign. Congressman Darrell Issa represents the state of California. He sits on the House Judiciary Committee. He heard Page's testimony today, and he joins us tonight. Congressman, thank you very much for coming on. So what can you tell us about what Lisa Page said?
Well, first of all, I was surprised how smart she is and how poised she is. She is one smart attorney. And I say that not in any way except to say she was much better witness for her own purposes, very careful, very poised. What we did see, though, is things like, and I can't speak to the questions and answers, as you can understand, but she would look over and put her hand out for the FBI lawyer there to object anytime she saw an opening for that objection. She was literally prompting for those. And I found that to be pretty reprehensible. She no longer works for them, and it's not her job to determine those so-called equities that are being invented by the FBI as some sort of a privilege.
Now, most of us have seen a partial transcript of her text exchanges with her boyfriend or former boyfriend. And so we have a pretty clear picture of her political views and the intensity of those views. Give us a picture of her involvement in the Russia investigation. How close to the center of that was she? How influential was she? How meaningful was her participation?
Well, this is something that she said in general, she said constantly, which is she kept wanting to reduce her importance. She went on at length about how many people changed between investigations and how there were too many other people for her, per se, to have had an influence. But let's remember, Peter Strzok looked at us and said he didn't have a bias, he didn't do anything, but he had no answer for why it was his computer that downgraded Hillary Clinton's misuse from a crime to a non-crime. Literally, that report was changed on his computer. So they were critical. They teamed up together, and there really wasn't an answer to that in any of her testimony, only an obfuscation of her importance.
Remarkable. Thank you very much, Congressman, for coming on and giving us that window into it. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Tucker.
Jonathan Turley is, of course, a professor at George Washington University Law School. He's been watching this saga from the very beginning, from a pretty non-aligned point of view, I would say, and he joins us tonight. So what do you make of, and I think you do have a pretty non-aligned point of view. I don't even know what your politics are. What do you make of the most recent developments with Lisa Page?
Well, I've also heard that she acquitted herself quite well, and yes. I think that's much to her credit. The problem is that we haven't seen a significant movement of the ball after the hearings that we've had. Peter Strzok refused to answer on at the insistence of the FBI most of the material questions. I mean, that it was quite surprising that anything that actually came close to answering the questions that most of us wanted answered, there would come an objection from the FBI. And I have to say, the FBI was well off the navigational map, in my view, in terms of privileges. They spoke of all these equities and having to follow these the investigatory privileges. None of that tracked very well to me. This was a closed investigation, but more importantly, this is an oversight committee. I thought it was a particularly strange scene to have this oversight committee speaking to a government employee and having this mantra of, I'd love to answer, but the FBI won't let me. So I'm hoping that the committee is going to pursue that aggressively, because it got very little because the FBI was issuing these objections.
I mean, is that that doesn't, you're the constitutional scholar, not I, but it doesn't seem like that's the way the system is supposed to work. This is an elected body. This is the lawmaking body. This is the core of our democracy. Speaking of our democracy, getting the finger from a federal employee. Like, how can that happen?
It's not supposed to happen this way. Look, there's always tension between the executive branch and legislative branches in Democratic and Republican administrations. There's a lot of objections that are made, and most of them are worked through. But this is a very different situation where you have a closed investigation, a matter of tremendous national significance, an oversight committee that has clearly reasonable requests here to get answers to these questions. The FBI would lose. If this goes to the courts, most of these questions would have to be answered. So it leaves you with this question again of why at this stage is the FBI making these sweeping objections and shutting off this information? I just don't see it.
Question. Well, you don't want to live in a country where federal agencies get to decide, how they can behave unilaterally. That's not democracy. Another thing, very quickly, Robert Mueller's investigation obviously indicted several more Russians this past week for various crimes. We're still missing something critical that supposedly justified this investigation, which is collusion. Do you think that is a prerequisite for a successful investigation? In other words, if we get to the end of this and there's no collusion uncovered, can we say it was a worthy exercise?
Well, I guess that's a good question. Look, the indictment's an important one. There's lots of crimes here. There's just not a lot of collusion. There's criminals, but not colluders. And so, yeah, it's good that we're identifying these criminals. What the FBI did with these Russians was a great service to this nation. But I think you can say that and still acknowledge what the president is saying, that after two massive indictments, and these are speaking indictments, so they're very detailed, there's really not a direct connection of collusion to the campaign itself. Now, you can say that. Doesn't mean that they're not going to establish it, but you can recognize that. Now, am I glad that Robert Mueller is investigating all this? You bet. I'm glad that indictment came down. The Russians really needed to be identified, and they did a great job. But this is not, when people say this is a witch hunt, there's obviously witches in those woods. We just indicted a bunch of them. The question is, which witches are we looking for? And these are not the colluders.
There are witches from many different countries, by the way, in our
That's
woods.
right.
And if we're going to go after some, let's go after them all. That's my view, but whatever. Professor, great to see you.
Thanks, Tucker.